Welcome to Pinsire Basketball Live. Today is a good day, namely because it is the day before the Toronto Raptors seal their fate at the draft lottery. Tomorrow, we'll have you covered on that via a live. Today is also a good day because there's some playoff games today. And if you're interested in watching playoff games with me and the PC crew, we will be on playback live at 3:30 for Denver Nuggets versus the OKC Thunder. That should be fun. But today's live is actually a really good one, and it's one that I've been thinking about doing for a while. It's a deep exploration of how basketball games are won and lost because through the years of doing content creation, reading comments, I see that a lot of people either overcomplicate or drastically oversimplify how a basketball game is won. And I think what the Raptors are doing with their young core and their bunch of rookies is very fascinating and very interesting. And I want to talk about it because I think that it will give a deeper understanding to us about just what this roster holds in terms of value. And I'm not necessarily talking trade value, I'm talking more of an intrinsic internal value in terms of what does a player like Jonathan Mobo project as going forward? How much patience will the Toronto Raptors have? And I do mention the draft lottery for a very good reason, because it is very clear to me that there are two roster spots that are earmarked for next year's key rotation. That is one, very likely your lottery pick this year, which should fall within the top 9 picks. And number two is a former All Star named Brandon Ingram. Those two players are probably going to suck up at least 60 minutes a night. That doesn't leave a hell of a lot of space for players like Grady Dick, Ochai Abaji, Jacoby Walter, Jonathan Mobo, Over Shamshi. And let's not even talk about all of those fringe hopefuls that you brought on, like AJ Lawson, Jared Roden, Colin Castleton, Orlando Robinson, et cetera, et cetera. So there's going to be a bit of a roster crunch. You might want to look at this year's summer league and this year's training camp a little bit like Hunger Games, because it's worth noting that I don't know how patient the Toronto Raptors are going to be with some of these players. Now, I want to put some caution to the wind here. I have been extremely bullish on the Toronto Raptors young players this year. I have been bullish in spite of the fact that they have not been very good. I want to explore why they weren't so good. Just how not good were they? How do they compare to other players on other teams that maybe were deep rotation guys, eighth guys, ninth guys? And I think all of this kind of comes back to the entire debate we've been having about Cade Cunningham all year. Did Cade Cunningham just get so much better this year? Or did the Detroit Pistons drastically bolster the roster around him, which allowed him to finally show off how good he is? I think this ties back very much to the conversation that happens on the internet every single day about just how good RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes are. Well, how good could they possibly be if they were the leading scorers on a team that won 30 games? I'll tell you, when you look at some of these deep roster guys on the Toronto Raptors, specifically guys like Castleton, Mobo, and such, Ochai, Grady, I think what you're going to see is that it's pretty much a miracle that the Raptors won 30 games this year. They won these 30 games through grit and toughness and a little bit of luck, and perhaps bad luck if you're a draft lottery fiend. But the truth is that most of Raptors history, we've had coaches and organizations and front offices that have looked at their roster and said, okay, we have this player that does this thing well, or we have this player who doesn't do this thing well. How can we create lineups and schemes to maximize what they do well and minimize what they don't do well? I feel like we've been having this conversation through most of the year. So I'll just expand on it a little bit for those of you who weren't privy to it or maybe didn't tune in for most of the season because you checked out and thought the Raptors were trash. Most teams don't like to put players together who get on each other's way. Most teams design lineups that complement each other. It's a little bit like making a cake and then forgetting to put in the sugar, right? Like there's an ingredient in every lineup. The dominant conversation right now is, should Jonathan Kuminga be getting more minutes? And there's talking heads that just don't understand why he can't get minutes. I'm certainly one of those people that believes he should be playing. But I understand Steve Kerr's rationale in terms of why he doesn't play. And the rationale, as Steve Kerr would describe it, and similar thoughts have been expressed by Steve Kerr throughout the years, where, Kerr will just get really down on this one player because of how he fits into a rotation. Jonathan Kuminga and Jimmy Butler are not optimal fit together. So if you had to pick, obviously Jimmy's the better player, the more stable playmaker, the better decision maker, the better player overall, the better defender. And so you pick Jimmy Butler. But that doesn't automatically mean that Jonathan Kuminga is worse than Brandon Pajemski or Moses Moody or Quentin Post. It just means that those players fit better with what you have. So the question then becomes, did the Raptors design an optimal five-man rotation around Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett or Emmanuel Quickley or Jakob Poeltl? Do these pieces fit? Were they supposed to fit? Or did the Raptors maybe look at their roster and say, forget the trend, let's not do that. Let's lose instead by not doing that. Because I'll tell you right now, if you don't scheme to hide your players' biggest weaknesses, you're going to lose a lot of games. And those players are going to have to agree to look phenomenally bad in the interim, in the hopes that looking bad over some period of time can make them better. If you have a player who is really, really good around the rim, like Rudy Gobert, right? Defensively, you would design a scheme that would see him in that position as much as humanly possible, right? If you have a really dominant on ball defender who struggles guarding the post, then you would do everything in your power to design a scheme defensively to make sure that that player ends up in their strongest part way more often than they end up in their weakest part. You certainly wouldn't design a game plan to say, "Hey, this really weak post defender, we're going to put him on Julius Randle as the primary matchup." You wouldn't do that. If you have a player who can't shoot, you probably wouldn't ask them to shoot a lot. If you have a player who can only shoot from the corners, you certainly wouldn't be asking them to take step back threes from the logo. And so this is just the way that most teams play basketball. But there are three teams this year specifically that didn't play basketball this way. And they're all tanking teams: the Toronto Raptors, the Utah Jazz, and the Brooklyn Nets. I think all three of these teams put players into unconventional roles and these weird lineups to sort of tank, but also to maybe develop. I'll bring this back to the two components or three components that really create winning: playmaking, play finishing, and scheme. That's really what it is, isn't it? Playmaking talent, or your initiator, your LeBron James; your play finishing, which is your Anderson Varejao and your Boobie Gibson, or your secondary creation or whatever; and then your scheme, how you use those players together. If I put LeBron James, let's play a simulation out. Let me say that I put a prime LeBron James in place of a Scotty Barnes this year. This team gets a lot better really quickly. But they don't just get better as an aggregate. They get better as individuals too. When you put a Scotty Barnes and you swap him out for a considerably higher level talent like a LeBron James, everybody's role gets easier. Suddenly those semi-contested layups are wide open layups. Suddenly those semi-contested corner shots are wide open corner shots. Suddenly the ball that sort of semi comes into your shooting pocket is right in your shooting pocket. The reason that superstars get paid what they get paid is not just for what they do as an individual on your parlay or your box score. It's usually what they can do for the other players around them. Even superstars who are not necessarily playmaking inclined superstars can do a lot for other players. Consider, for instance, if we replaced Jakob Poeltl, a so-so rim protector and an average defender, with a great defender. Let's say, for instance, I don't know, Ivica Zubac, someone who's like all NBA level defense. How much better does every defender get? Is Grady still a fifth percentile defender with Ivica Zubac back there? Probably not. The hardest thing in basketball, in my opinion, is projecting how certain things translate across levels and across contexts. It's really difficult to understand what a Walter Clayton, who had the ball in his hands so much for Florida this year, is going to look like at an NBA level against NBA athletes, against NBA competition with a less prominent role. You have to do a lot of projection. This is why draft analysts and scouts are so often wrong. This is why a player like Thomas Robinson, when you see him in high school or in the college level, you start imagining what all that explosion and explosiveness is going to look like at the next level. But what you don't factor in is how hard he's going to work. You don't factor in the increased level of competition. When you saw a James Wiseman at high school, even the limited time that he played in Memphis, you certainly could not have imagined that he would be holding on for his NBA life 4 years later. How can someone so big, so strong, so athletic, so fluid fail? Easy. Lateral mobility and scheme. Once teams figure out what you can't do, you're not a good decision maker, you don't operate well in space, they will hunt you, because that's how games are won. Games are won through scheme. They're won through talent. Of course, they're won through playmaking talent, and they're won through finishing, but they're also won through scheme. When I figure out that Grady Dick cannot guard in space, cannot navigate screens, I will put him in ball screens repeatedly until you take him off the court. It's what we're seeing with the New York Knicks right now. They figured out very early that Mitchell Robinson cannot shoot free throws. So what are they doing? They're hacking him. Every time he's involved in a screen, every time he touches the basketball, boom, hack, boom, hack. Go do what you're not good at. So generally speaking, most teams don't have players who are so incomplete that they can be completely hunted off the court. If you can't shoot and you're not a superstar, you're not going to play, because teams will just leave you. They will leave you. If you're not a 35% three-point shooter, at minimum 35%, I'm talking generously 35%, they're going to leave you, which means Jonathan Mobo's path to becoming a productive NBA player is already an uphill battle. Jamal Shedd's path to becoming a productive NBA player, Davion Mitchell's path, Jared Rhoden's path, AJ Lawson's path, all of these guys have very huge uphill battles. I think for the Toronto Raptors, if you're looking at last season and you're looking at the players you had on your roster, what you have to imagine is the rising tide. What happens when you replace a significantly below average player in Grady Dick with a significantly above average player in Brandon Ingram? What happens to all those other pieces around? What happens when a player who's playing 20 minutes a night in maybe a 22% usage role scales down to a more comfortable 15% usage role? If you're looking for any evidence that this works, I'll prove it to you. Look at the Toronto Raptors defense in the first half of the season and the second half of the season. Again, first half of the season, no scheme, no hiding. That was the stated goal coming out. And I told y'all, as the Raptors were 29th in defense, they work too hard and they're doing this the right way. At some point, the tide will turn. And what happened? The tide turned. The Raptors finished the season 23-22. And over that 44 to 45 game span, they were a top 5 defense in the NBA without necessarily the personnel that you would usually associate with having that level of defense. They just adjusted the scheme. That's really what it was. They did the development work. They figured out how to guard the ball. They put these guys into uncomfortable positions to see what they can and can't do. They identified clearly what their particular personnel were capable of doing so that they had that intel going into next season for better evaluation. Now we've already seen you in a scaled up role. Now can we scale your role back? Now we can hide you a little bit. Now we can protect you a little bit, but not before we try to figure out what you can and can't do. And most teams never really figure it out. Most teams really don't know. I certainly don't think the Dallas Mavericks know what Jaden Hardy looks like in a 34% usage role over a 10-game sample. They don't know. I know what Scotty Barnes looks like as a mid-post hub, as a mid-range assassin, as a high-volume three-point shooter who takes roughly 10 shots, off the dribble. I know what he looks like as a kind of a lead initiator. I also know what he looks like as a secondary creator. I know what he looks like as a weak side shot blocker, lower third of the defense. I also know what he looks like as a screen navigator who has the assignment of guarding the other team's best player and chasing people around screens. I have all this intel. which means I can make better decisions. And I think the Raptors are going to have to make some better decisions. Now, enough rambling. I do want to show you how Crafted sees the players on this team. I'll caution to the wind. These analytics are going to look horrible. You might want to close your eyes. But I do want to compare the players that were the other guys for the Raptors to put into some context. Last year, the Detroit Pistons employed guys like Malachi Flynn. They had guys like, oh man, what the hell is that bust's name? 7th overall pick, French guy, Killian Hayes, right? They had guys like that, right? You replace those guys with Fontecchio, Tobias Harris. Again, what's the gap? You don't rate Tobias Harris as a superstar. I certainly don't think Tobias Harris is a superstar. But the gap between Tobias Harris and Killian Hayes is like the gap between like me and a professional basketball player. It's really big. You know what I mean? Maybe the gap between me and a professional basketball player is bigger, but you get my point. Like when you scale up to a 70th percentile player versus a 5th percentile player, it might as well be the difference between Jaylen Brown and LeBron James in his prime. Like it's a really big gap. We don't typically pay attention to role players. We don't really pay attention to ancillary pieces and fifth options, but they matter so much. And they matter because not only are they supposed to be feeding off your stars, but your stars are supposed to benefit from what they do as well. Again, the Jonathan Kuminga equation. Jonathan Kuminga does not help Jimmy Butler as much as Moses Moody. Why? Because he's not as good a shooter. That's really as simple as it gets, right? So if you want to help Scotty Barnes, there is a roster out there that could make him look incredible. You don't have it. Now, you're probably moving in the right direction with Brandon Ingram, but certainly I think it's worth noting that you do have some big roster decisions ahead with some of these players. So I want to start with one of my favorite role players, not a player that you think is a superstar, not a player that you think is a max player, not a player that you probably associate as being, one of the top 150 players in the league, but he's a very, very good player. And that is Isaiah Joe for the OKC Thunder. Take a look for a moment at just what he does well. It's extremely efficient. His shot quality is ridiculous. He's not very turnover prone. He is like one of the least error prone players in the league with a 4.5% turnover percentage. He doesn't have a huge load or creation because, well, that's Shai's job and that's J-Dub's job. He doesn't have to do that. He's extremely portable. He fits into a million different lineups and he is capable defensively. He's also positionally versatile. I think you're going to see that the tide usually rises with better players. Obviously, if you replace Scotty Barnes with a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you're going to see a lot of things get better for everybody around offensively because Shai is that much better than Scotty offensively. It's the same thing when I say you replace Grady with a Brandon Ingram. It is a big jump from Grady to Ingram, right? And the jump, weirdly enough, the swap helps Grady and Brandon Ingram, right? So now let's move on. This is an example of just a role player, okay? Again, he wasn't the sixth man of the year. He's not the best guard off the bench in the league. Most people wouldn't even think of him as a top 6 guard off the bench in the league. This is a guard who played for one of the best teams in the league. I want to show you some Raptors now. Here's Jared Rhoden. Again, I think Jared Rhoden was really good for the Raptors. Relative to some of the players we played this year, Rhoden was a pretty decent player overall. I think he was ridiculously efficient, especially when you compare him to players like RJ Barrett, who had more of an elevated role. He had a decent, he was decently errorless overall. He had a lot in common with players like Jacoby Walter in terms of like just the play style and maybe even a little bit of Ochai Agbaji. He took a decent number of threes for a guy who maybe, isn't considered like a great 3-point shooter. He was capable defensively given the context of the team around him. And I think he participated pretty well in his 14 games. He is certainly not the worst player who played for the Raptors. The worst player who played for the Raptors this year, one of them at least, is Bruce Brown. He was awful. Bruce Brown is really, really on minimum contract watch. After signing that 2-year, $45 million deal, I guarantee you there's not a team in this league that's giving him more than $5 million. And it's probably they're going to give him $45 million. They're going to give him $5 million on the basis of who he was 3 years ago. I can tell you right now, Bruce Brown was officially one of the worst players in the NBA this past year. And he played a lot of games for the Toronto Raptors this year. Here's Grady Dick. Another player who was one of the worst players in the league last year, really bad. Started out really well, really difficult role, really difficult role defensively. Man, they put him through the ringer, right? They put him through hell, offensively and defensively. I think these analytics obviously paint him as a terrible player, but the only thing these analytics can do is measure how you performed in the role you were given. I think there's a lot of questions about whether Grady is ready for the role that was given. Again, Darko Rakovic once said he has the body of a 16-year-old. At best this year, he had the body of a 19-year-old. This is a very young player, 21 years old, still has a tremendous amount of potential and could certainly become much, much more than what he's been for the Raptors. That being said, what is the gap between Grady Dick, Jamison Battle, Ochai Agbaji, Jacoby Walter, AJ Lawson, Jared Roden? In terms of impact, not big at all. Not big at all. In terms of upside, he's probably on the higher end of that scale. He and Jacoby certainly project as having the greater upside, partially because of their shooting, partially because of how they shoot, partially because of their movement shooting tendencies, partially because of their size, their athleticism. Grady is an underrated athlete, in my opinion. And I don't think that that's without stating. You look at you look at Jamison Battle, you look at Grady Dick, it's very easy to argue that Jamison Battle and Ochai Agbaji did better at their jobs this year than Grady did at his job. Question is, who had the harder job? Grady had the harder job. And there's a reason for that. Grady, RJ, Scotty had harder jobs than the other wings on this team. Jacoby slowly morphed towards the end of the year into a harder job after progressing from an easier job earlier on. But these are the players that you need to give those harder jobs to. It's the Jonathan Mobos and the Ochai Agbaji's, the guys who project more as role players that you want to give those simpler tasks to, just to bring them up. Because there's really no point in trying to train the Jamal Sheds of the world to try to be a player that they're never going to be at this level. Grady might still become that type of player. Scotty and RJ may still become those types of players, which is why those reps are where they are. What about Colin Castleton? Another of one of the worst players in the league this year, really useless offensively, really inefficient for a player this size, but had some decent rim protection and projects, at least in theory. I think it's just worth noting. Colin Castleton was a really good college player. He was a really decent college player. And I believe he was undrafted if I remember correctly. But this is a 25-year-old who was a very productive college player at a very, very good school. He played for Florida. So maybe put some caution to the wind when you are starting to look at some of these prospects who were phenomenally productive at the college level. Guys like Quentin Post last year maybe worked out. Maybe a guy like Maxime Renaud this year does not. All I can tell you is Colin Castleton was one of the best shot blockers in college basketball. And some of these things just don't translate to the NBA level, man. Continuing on with the centers who were for the Raptors, slightly better than Colin Castleton was probably Bruno Fernando. Again, he got to the rim, he rebounded the shit out of the basketball, he got to the line, he was super productive, very limited, crashed the offensive glass, and he blocked a ton of shots. He wasn't a bad defender. He wasn't a bad defender at all. He was one of your better defenders. Ironically, he participated on this team at a time when everything was being funneled to him. I do think there's a world in which, in the right context, Bruno Fernando could be like a 35th percentile offensive player and like an 85th percentile defensive player. So this could get a lot better. But Bruno Fernando is not on this team. We move on. We move to Ochai Agbaji, the guy who had a very simple role and did two things really well. He was really versatile defensively, and he made a lot of threes. This was a saving grace for Ochai. He didn't do a hell of a lot else well. He finished around the rim a lot better, so his efficiency numbers are moving into the 67th percentile, which is great. It's great. He was productive in terms of deflections, which is good. His rim protection numbers and overall rim defense, which I harped about all year as the one thing that I really like about him defensively, was good. But his point of attack defense wasn't great. His overall attention to detail off the ball wasn't great. He wasn't really a creator at any level. He didn't really handle pick and roll possessions. His play type was very limited. This is the ideal. Now, again, some people who look at the 3-point shooting, maybe look at some of those numbers, see him maybe hit a couple of dunks, see him as an ex lottery pick, realize he's a national champion who was the best player on a national champion like Kansas. They see his age. He's like 24, 25 years old. And they think to themselves, Rob, could Ochai Agbaji be better than RJ Barrett? Don't hold your breath. This is the point. You can only rate out what you do. If I take a driver's test, you can't judge my knowledge of astrophysics. He took the simplest test on this team this year, and he did okay at it. This is nothing. This is not a player that you're earmarking $15 million a year for on an extension. This is not a player that you hold out of trade talks if a first round pick becomes available. This is, however, a player who probably figures to be a lot better than this as the context around him improves. Again, what I say, play making, play finishing. As playmaking talent, i.e. Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, play more games, play more minutes. If he's the fifth guy on that rotation as opposed to the third guy, he's probably going to benefit disproportionately. Moving on to a surprise for the Raptors this year, and probably one of their better wings this year, which is really weird to say, but that's AJ Lawson. Took a ton of shots, wasn't crazy effective at hitting those shots, 54% true shooting, but overall held his own defensively better than most of the wings on this team. Had a decent load in creation, relatively speaking. Wasn't very error prone because everything was kind of limited to dribble and shoot. But overall, I think this is a guy who probably figures to be a really productive 10th to 14th guy on a roster. Probably closer to 14th, maybe just a good depth piece to have in case you suffer a bunch of injuries. Certainly not a guy that you need to get super gassed up about hitting, 30 points every now and again. His overall analytics are being buoyed and, perhaps carried a lot by a couple of good performances, but those performances did happen. They did happen against NBA competition. And it does matter to me that you found this guy for nothing. It does matter because both he and Jamison Battle were two of your more productive wing players, which is really crazy to say, but it's also you're comparing them to Bruce Brown, right? We carry on. So I do think that AJ Lawson has a chance to carve out more of a permanent role on this team going forward. Jonathan Mobo, the first of many, or not the first. I mean, Grady Dick is the exact opposite. Jonathan Mobo is the anti-Grady Dick. He is to offense what Grady is to defense, 5th percentile. This is a one-way player. Now, that's not to say that Jonathan Mobo can't get better offensively. We saw some progress with the shooting. We saw some progress with the shooting form. We saw some great talent as a passer. And we saw that as his role towards the end of the season, where he picked up that triple-double and then had a near triple-double in the next game, we saw that as his role fluctuated more back towards things that he was actually normally good at, he actually was dominant, if not very productive. Defensively is where I think Jonathan Mobo can be absolutely beastly. Now, I don't think he's ever going to be a big scorer at the NBA level. Can he be a productive role player? Could we maybe get him to a level that Ochai Agbaji is at right now offensively and turn him into a defensive specialist? What does that actually project to? It doesn't project to Pascal Siakam. It certainly doesn't project to a star, but it does project to a guy who can be in the upper half of your rotation as like the 9th guy on your team. And maybe that's the hope right now, that Jonathan Mobo can just be a really productive, very energetic, smart passing, hit his open shots type of undersized, big, switchable wing who can come in and wreak havoc for, 10 to 15 minutes a night. This probably is not projecting to be a starter at the next level. But that's not to say that he can't get there, because he is a late bloomer. He is a player who has an insanely hard work ethic. And who knows? Certainly, if I was looking at Pascal Siakam's rookie numbers, I would not have projected an all-star. So maybe Jonathan Mobo can become much, much more than that. But going into next season, this is definitely a player whose rotation job is on the line if he doesn't get a lot better at a lot of things. Let's move forward to Jamal Shad, one of my favorite rookies all year. I was petitioning for this guy to be second team all rookie. Why? because he got a lot of points and a lot of assists. But the holes are real. The efficiency numbers are terrible. The rim finishing was tough, very tough. The shooting was inconsistent as hell. You're an undersized guard. You have to be a damn sniper. When I show you Peyton Pritchard and other guards across the league, you will see the gap between Jamal Shed and Peyton Pritchard. Now, what does Jamal Shed do really well? He's a really good passer. He's really tenacious, gets a ton of deflections. He causes turnovers. And on his end, he doesn't exactly create, he needs to cut down his turnovers because you certainly cannot be the 10th or 11th guy. But in terms of projecting forward, if he is not to get significantly better next year, and you are penciling him in not as your third string point guard, but your backup point guard next year, he will be probably the worst backup point guard in the NBA next year. Are you willing to live with that? Because again, there's a version of this where he gets dramatically better. But you're talking about one of the winningest players in college basketball, one of the best players in college basketball, who transitioned to the pros, occasionally started for you, occasionally played heavy minutes for you, occasionally flashed moments where he was the best player for an entire quarter. He needs to make all of this more consistent. He did become a much better shooter. Is he ever going to be an above average efficiency guy at the NBA level? Probably not. This is probably always going to be push and pull with him. He doesn't have the size. So there's a reason you got him at 45. He is, for all intents and purposes, as per his role last year and his performance in that role, Jamal Shed was probably somewhere around the 300 to 380th best player in the league last year. He wasn't the worst, but he certainly wasn't anywhere close to a player who could have carved out a meaningful rotation role on any good team. There's not one good team that would have employed any of the guys. I want you to ask yourself, which of the players that I've shown you so far would actually play minutes for OKC this year? The answer, if you said one, you are being generous. If you said none, you are being accurate, because Ousmane Dieng would probably be our starting power forward when we were tanking. Ousmane Dieng does not play for the OKC Thunder. There is a bar to how good you have to be productive at the NBA level. I don't think the Raptors necessarily did these young guys any favors by putting them in the roles that they put them in, but I do want to point out that there are gaps here. Now, the rookie that I'm probably I want to say the most hopeful about, and the one that I could actually see being like a staple for the Raptors going forward in terms of their top 8, top 9, that's Jacoby Walter. I actually do think that his role was harder as it got further and further. And I think that he has all the requisite stuff to be a high rotation player. I think he can be on the impact level of an Isaiah Joe. I think he can be on the impact level of an Aaron Nesmith, players that we're going to look at. I do think that this guy has a chance to be that good. Okay. Will he be that good? I don't know. But I think he's going to benefit more. He and Grady are probably going to benefit the most from Brandon Ingram. I think Brandon Ingram does a lot of good things for those guys next year. Here's Jamison Battle. 96 percentile shot quality, baby. That's what I like to see. And crazy efficient. This was a great find for the Raptors. But once again, you can look at the three-point shooting. You can look at the three-point volume. You can look at the efficiency. You can look at the shot quality index. Which playoff team would Jamison Battle have had a role, an actual role on this year? Would he have played? He might. Honestly, I don't. Okay, I want to compare him right now to another player. Hang on. I'm actually going to pull it off and then pull it on. I just want to see what it looks like. And I want to compare him to Caleb Houston, because I think that Caleb Houston was a guy that just randomly parsed out a role on the Orlando Magic, in large part because they simply did not have another player. Hold on one second. Give me one sec, guys. Sorry. Huh. Oh, I'm misspelling Caleb. That's what's going wrong. Okay, give me one sec here. Yeah, I think Caleb Houston is about as close as it gets to Jamison Battle. Yeah, it's roughly similar. It's really similar, except Houston was a better defender, but he also played with better defenders. I do think Caleb Houston and Jameson Battle are very similar. So, okay, that's probably as hard. That's as high as it gets. You would have to be on a completely shooting deprived team like Orlando, and there would have to be a pile of injuries like Jalen Suggs, etc., for you to make that jump, right? Chosen said Caleb went 32nd. Caleb was also much younger. Caleb is much younger. Caleb is like, I think he's a year or two younger than Scotty Barnes. So, and Caleb is bigger, and I think he's a better athlete. So, again, I don't think that Jamison Battle is a permanent staple on this team going forward. I do think if you're going to have a 12th guy or 13th guy, it might as well be a guy with a lethal jump shot like this. But to people who are like, maybe Jamison Battle can be our 6th or 7th guy next year, we can't go trade for this guy. What will happen to Jamison Battle minutes? Chill on that stuff because he still has a lot of holes defensively. He's still not very dynamic off the move or, off the dribble. And again, all of these things will get schemed out next year. All these rookies that we saw this year, whatever you don't do well and that you don't get better at this summer, that's going to be a year of scouting data that's going to be factored into what people are going to force you to do next year. This is why NBA careers are on average 4 years. Most people won't make it past 3 to 4 years, largely because of this, because the Malachi Flynn trap, the David Johnson trap. Yeah, you're good at that. Yeah, you're efficient in this one thing. What happens when I take that one thing away? What if I force you to go right and I know you're a left-hand finisher? Now what happens? It's the same thing with RJ Barrett. It's the same thing with Scotty Barnes. I'm going to push you to your counter until you break. Okay. So Jamison Battle, you're not going to get as many open looks. You're going to be on scouting reports next year, more so than you were this year already because teams had adjusted to him. And I'm curious to see how it translates. I think he's a fantastic guy. I think it's a great find as an undrafted guy. I think he was absolutely a part of my Jurassic 5 fandom this year and how excited I was for this team. And I do want to mention, and I'll mention this after, is how these players performed is not an indication of how I feel about these players going forward. And I'll explain why, largely with examples like Precious Achua and Jonathan Kuminga. Moving forward, here's a rotation player that didn't play a lot this year. And he only got 27 games. Part of that was injuries. Part of that was depth. But this is one of the deeper teams in the league. And Vince Williams Jr. is a very good player. In my opinion, he's a rotation player for a lot of teams. He would be a starter level player for the Raptors. I want to show you the gap. The Memphis Grizzlies are not in the playoffs anymore. The Memphis Grizzlies are not a championship contender. The Memphis Grizzlies benched this guy. And this guy is so much better than Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, AJ Lawson, and any one of these other players you want to talk about. Vince Williams Jr. is actually a good basketball player. That's what I'm trying to say. Jalen Wells maybe, just fits better. GG Jackson, whatever. When I'm describing Jalen Wells, Vince Williams Jr., and GG Jackson, I'm describing 3 players who are leaps and bounds better right now than Jamison Battle, Ochai Agbaji, and Grady Dick. And that's not to say that'll always be the case. That's not to say it's in a vacuum true. I'm just saying there's levels to depth. And I think the Raptors need to internally understand this, that when other teams' 9th player is better than your 5th player, it doesn't matter how much better your 1st player is or 2nd player is, you're going to lose those games. And that's the point that I'm trying to emphasize here, is that there are these rotation level, replacement level players. Like consider Gershon Yabusele, consider Jeff Doughton, consider a lot of players. Even a Kelly Olynyk who played for the Raptors this past year. Kelly was a pretty decent-ish rotation player. Not ideal, not optimal, certainly needs a rim protector next to him, but he was decent. He was a decent NBA player. Like you're not like Kelly Olynyk is not lost in Boston's rotation. Like he wouldn't be up in Boston's rotation, but he would find minutes on Boston. He could find minutes on Orlando. He could find minutes on most teams. And that's what I'm trying to say. There's a cutoff of 220. Let's just say the top 220 players. If you have players below that high water mark of 220 in your core rotation of 9, you're going to lose a ton of games and you're going to be blaming the wrong people. You're going to be blaming your stars. You're going to be blaming your coaching staff. And the reality is it's not possible to win with such big liabilities out there. I'll give you another example of a player who, is lost in the rotation right now, but is actually a really good player. And that's Jonathan Kuminga. Is he perfect? No. Is his shooting perfect? No. Decision making? No. But you see what he's doing right now. I made a video a few weeks ago saying the Raptors should explore trading for Jonathan Kuminga on the cheap. If the Warriors can't use him because they have Jimmy Butler, well, then I know a team that could certainly use his athleticism and maybe develop him. This is absolutely a good player. You'd have to be stupid not to understand this. He is not a bottom 200 player in the league. No, he is an upper 180 type of player. It just so happens, maybe, that the Warriors have a lot of guys who are on the cusp of being almost as good as Jonathan Kuminga, but just happen to fit in a little bit better around Steph, Draymond, and Jimmy. And of course, that's just the politics in the NBA. That's how it's going to work. You're going to orient your roster towards your better players. I get it. I get it completely. But to understand the gap here, Jonathan Kuminga versus Ochai Agbaji is like, it's such a huge gap in talent, production, defensive upside, all of it. Like it's a massive gap. It's a huge gap. And it's not just the numbers, man. It's the eye test. You have to be blind not to see it. Consider Asante Aldama, right? A player who played off the bench, right? Occasionally started, but came off the bench a lot. Santi Aldama is a fantastic basketball player. Santi is a really damn good basketball player. He is on par in my 100% estimation as an overall talent to some of your best players. Players like Jakob Poeltl, players like RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly, like this guy's right there. Right there. He's on that level. He's in that range of 80th best player to like 150th, 160th best player. You can throw a lot of names that you wouldn't expect to put in that tier of player, which includes guys like Keon Ellis. Again, take a look. Keon Ellis, right? One of the best defenders in the league, right? A really efficient offensive player. He's come a long way as a shooter. You got to look at Keon Ellis and say, is this one of the top 140 players in the league? 100% he's one of the top 140 players in the league. He is. He is so much better right now than any player you have coming off your bench. This is an undrafted guy that the Kings found. So, okay. I think we spent plenty of time sort of eviscerating the Toronto Raptors young players. It's something that I didn't want to do at any point this year, but I thought it was a good time for a reality check because we are heading into the draft. Consider even teams like Washington. I didn't show the analytics, but guys like Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, Chris Middleton, they're so much better than your other guys. They're so much better than a Grady Dick. There's like right now the gap between Chris Middleton and Grady Dick is like night and day. It's night and day. So is all hope lost for the Raptors? Hell no. No. This is not hope is lost at all. This is a matter of a bunch of things have to be like a work in progress for the Raptors. Number one, the reason that I was so high on the Raptors young players is not because of what they can currently do. It's because of what I believe are the requisite ingredients for development. And I think most of these players, if not all of these players, have those ingredients. Take a case like a Jonathan Kuminga. How much better has Jonathan Kuminga really gotten? Now, Jonathan Kuminga, some people could very easily assume is stupid or doesn't work hard. None of these things are true. Jonathan Kuminga is an extremely hard worker, apparently a gym rat, according to people I talked to, according to accounts from Austin Rivers. He's a really hard worker. Precious Achiuwa is a really hard worker. Precious Achiuwa was a gym rat. That's why Masai Ujiri loved him. What is it about Jonathan Kuminga and Precious Achiuwa that doesn't allow them to progress at the same rate as, say, a Keon Ellis or an Isaiah Joe? What is that magic ingredient that allows players to get better? Is it just jump shooting? No. What is it? Is it athleticism? Certainly not. Jonathan Kuminga and Precious Achiuwa are plenty athletic. What is the gap between a Pascal Siakam and a Jonathan Kuminga? Because if you're just talking straight up talent at 19, Kuminga clears. Why is Pascal Siakam going to have the better career? What is it? It's not size. It's not wingspan. What is it? It's something. It's like the 6-8 inches between your ears. That's what matters. Openness to experience. the ability to receive feedback, seek feedback, the ability to surround yourself with the right people, all of these soft skills, all of these other things, putting the right position, even having the right development staff in place. But you can have the right development staff. uh, just the player won't listen. The player does not receive the change, right? You take a guy like Ulrich, consistently getting better. The trajectory is through the roof. We don't have analytics to show you how bad Ulrich was this year, but I assure you, Ulrich Shamshi right now is not one of the top 500 basketball players in the world. He could, however, one day be one of the top 150 best basketball players in the world. That's the equation that the Raptors are banking on. Grady Dick may not be a top 250 player in the world right now, but there's a hope that one day he could be a top 100 player in the world. Same thing with Jacoby Walter. It's the same thing with Jonathan Mobo. It's the same thing with all of these guys. The Raptors are basically taking a lot of 20-cent bets. They're taking a lot of 20-cent bets. This is not a big bet. This is not James Wiseman at number 2. This is not Marvin Bagley at number 2. This is not Tijon Salon at number 6. This is not a huge bet. They're taking a lot of small calculated bets. And I'll tell you what awesome thinking is going into their calculated bets. They're not betting on existing talent, an existing talent trait. They're not betting exclusively on athleticism. They're not betting completely on youth and saying, okay, let's just bring in a whole bunch of 18-year-olds and see what sticks to the wall. They're banking on culture. They're banking on the ability to receive feedback, the ability to seek and receive feedback, the ability to grow, change, adapt. They're seeking good people who, at worst case, become really supportive teammates. I think if you're looking at the ingredient that will ultimately make the Raptors' young players more successful than the average prospect, it really does come down to who they are as people. I think it comes down to how willingly they seek that feedback, the people that they surround themselves with, the work that they're willing to do, but are they willing to do the right work? Are they self-aware enough? I'm pretty sure if you asked right now, Jonathan Mobo, are you a good shooter? He would tell you straight up to your face, no, I'm not, but I'm working on it. That in itself is half the battle. How many of these players are gassed up to death from high school AAU level to say, nah, bro, you should be a star? What is Jonathan Kuminga's internal circle telling him? What's Patrick Williams' internal circle telling him? What's Precious Achua's internal circle telling him? They're telling him, you're better than Mitchell Robinson. You're better than Brandon Pajemski. You should be playing. Well, that's the wrong attitude because obviously you're not playing. And it's not just because the coach is against you. It's because you lack the skills to fit in or the lack the adaptability and the maturity to be willing to be a role player. That's the thing. When Jamal Shed came into, the Toronto Raptors system, he came in as the third string point guard. He didn't sulk about it though, right? He accepted it. He didn't, secretly like he wasn't sitting there like, yeah, I'm a better defender than this guy. I'm a better shooter than this guy. I should be the starting point guard. No, he came in with absolutely no ego. And it's the same thing with Jacoby Walter, right? Jacoby came in as a worker. He was coming in willing to work. Every player on the Raptors roster has one thing in common. They are not averse to delayed gratification. And I think that that's what will be the saving grace for this team, that they understand that brick by brick by brick, the progress will maybe not be linear, that maybe some of these players will spend some time in the G League in their second year. Maybe some of them will be doing summer league for the third year in a row next summer. But at some point, again, how much rope you're willing to give these players as you move into your contention window is another story. But at some point, all of these players and likely these coaches and the GM and the president all believe that the incremental step-by-step growth that all of these players can show over some period of time will allow them to become meaningful contributors at some level in the future. And I think that that is the hopeful part. Now, what happens if the Toronto Raptors draft a project? What if they draft an 18-year-old? What if they go and draft a Kaman Malawach or a Carter Bryant or a Jeremiah Fears? Carter Bryant isn't 18, fairness. He's almost 20. But still, these are all players who will factor in to one thing. They're not going to be as good as Keon Ellis. They're not going to be as good as Santi Aldama. They're not going to be as good as Jonathan Kuminga or Vince Williams. They're probably going to be more in line with the Jamison Battles and the Jacoby Walters of the world. Maybe marginally better, Rookies don't usually help you win. You know, there were some rookies this year who were a lot better than Jacoby Walter. Khalil Ware was much better than Jacoby Walter. Stephon Castle was much better than Jacoby Walter. Jared McCain was much better than all of them, right? You can take a lot of rookies and say Raptors may not have had a single player who was a top 15 rookie. Certainly none of their rookies were as good as Matas Buzelis. None of their rookies were as good as uh, Khalil Ware, already mentioned. None of their rookies. In fact, I could argue that even a guy like Kyle Filipowski probably outperformed most of the Raptors rookies, if not all of the Raptors rookies, right? There were a lot of productive rookies. That's not the goal that the Raptors were going for. They were not trying to be like, okay, how can we put Jacoby in the position to make an all rookie team? Because I'm pretty sure if you had oriented yourself in that direction, you probably could have made it happen. Jacoby is plenty talented. So is Jonathan Mobo. The point wasn't that. But the point is that if you're adding another player who's going to be a liability to your winning, how many more liabilities can you have towards your winning before you start losing a lot of games? That's kind of my point. How much does what the Raptors, first of all, what happens tomorrow night with the draft lottery, and then subsequently what happens in June with the actual draft pick, how much does that impact the current roster of young players that you have, given that I've already established that all of those players are liabilities to winning right now? How long a leash does Grady Dick have if Con Knipple is the pick? Because Con will get priority right away. It's a lottery pick. There's a marketing element to it. I understand they'll probably still, give Grady some run here, but Grady, Con, Jacoby, Jameson, Ochai, someone's out. Someone's out immediately. All your best players are wings, and now you got 5 wings off the bench. So, given how wing heavy this draft is, Kaspar's, even Jeremiah Fears, Jace Richardson, Carter Bryant, you can consider all these guys wings. Does the wing that comes in with that 8th, 9th, 7th pick, 4th pick, Ace Bailey at 4, does that squeeze out? Who's that pushing out, right? You really have like 2 major holes on your roster. Backup point guard, which, assuming that Scotty is not playing backup point guard, is a hole, and assuming Jamal Shed does not take a jump. And then your backup big positions, right? Assume for a second that Scotty is going to start at the 4 and then play backup 1. You still have a bit of a hole at the backup 4, the backup 5. Ulrich is not going to take that step. You don't have a mid-level exception this year to fill that gap. If you don't fill that gap with this draft pick, i.e., Kaman Malawach, Derek Queen, one of those players, Noah Senge is not ready to contribute at that level, at the NBA level at all. He'll be a G League guy this year. I'll tell you right now, if you pick Noah Senge, this is not going to be a guy who's going to come in and plug a hole for you 25 minutes a night off the bench. It's not happening. And Lord help you if you ever get screwed with Jakob Poeltl getting an injury, touch wood. So is this a time where you maybe look at an Ochai Baji, look at an RJ Barrett, look at one of these wings, a Grady Dick, and just say, we need a center? If we draft a wing, do we need to swap out for a center? I do believe in the philosophy that you ultimately have to, trade, like pick the best player available for you, not the best player available for everybody else, number one. And number two, if you do pick the best player available and that player happens to play in a position where you're already 4 deep, doesn't that mean that you have to adjust your roster elsewhere to balance yourself out? Or are you going to play Jameson Battle and Jonathan Mobo at the 5? Probably not. So the Raptors do have some glaring needs going into this draft. Obviously, the best thing that could ever happen for this team is Cooper Flag. That would be great. Cooper Flag would be great. I think beyond Cooper Flag, there are no saviors in this draft. Dylan Harper will create a roster crunch. Granted, it would be a great problem to have. Ace Bailey will create a roster crunch. Carter Bryant will create a roster crunch. I think Kaman makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's a reason why we keep, mocking him to the Raptors, is because the fit is so seamless. There's a giant center size, rim protector size hole on this team, and Kaman fits it perfectly. But what if Kaman is not the best player available? Pick Carter Bryant. Try to shore up your backup big spot with your second round pick. So it just kind of comes down to this, right? Going into next season, if you want to be good, if you want to be competitive, there are going to be players who are going to be available for the minimum contract who are significantly better than some of these young players you have on this team. DeLon Wright right now is a much better player than Jamal Shed. DeLon Wright was a minimum contract guy this year. I actually want to prove that to you for a second here. One sec. Just to give you an idea of what a minimum guy like DeLon Wright was. Yeah, there's DeLon Wright. See my point? A significantly better player than Jamal Shed this past year. And this is not a gap that Jamal Shed is going to overcome overnight, right? This is not going to happen. Jamal Shed is not going to be better than DeLon Wright next year. It's just not, it's not easy to be as good as DeLon Wright. But DeLon Wright isn't even playing for the New York Knicks right now. You see what I mean? That's kind of my point. Is like, you've got teams out there that have third stringers that are significantly better than your second stringers, and you're sitting online bitching about how Scotty Barnes can't carry these lineups. Bro, nobody can carry these lineups other than peak LeBron James. If you want me to roast Scotty for not being peak LeBron James, cool. But again, for the people who have this online discourse of Scotty versus Paolo, Scotty versus Cade, Scotty versus Halliburton, Scotty versus so-and-so, RJ versus this guy, please understand those guys did not play with Jamal Shed and Davion Mitchell. And that's not disrespect to those guys. It's just this entire video was hopefully to explain that there is a significant gap between the Tobias Harrises of the world, the DeLon Wrights of the world, the Tim Hardaway Juniors of the world, the Deuce McBrides of the world, and what the Raptors have in those spots. And when they decide to be good, those are not hard positions to fill. When Fred VanVleet infamously said that we have a lot of players getting unearned opportunity on this team, he was referring to guys like Delano Banton, Malachi Flynn, Precious Achua, etc. I kind of understand that. I understand that. I don't like that he said it to the media, but I get it. Jamal Shed, Jameson Battle, Jacoby Walter, Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, AJ Lawson, Jared Rhoden. It's all examples of unearned opportunity at an NBA level. That's what the Raptors made last year about, is giving a whole bunch of people who had no business being rotation players in the NBA, rotation roles in the NBA. It accomplished two very significant things. Number one, as I mentioned before, it allowed you to see what these players could do. It allowed them to see what they couldn't do so that hopefully they can get better at it. And number two, it hopefully made the players who had to play with those players significantly better. Scotty Barnes has more defensive attention on him because of the players around him being non-shooters. When you put Scotty Barnes on the court with Jonathan Mobo and, I don't know, Jamal Shed, which is a lineup combination that he played with several times, or Jonathan Mobo plus Davion Mitchell, or Jonathan Mobo plus Davion Mitchell plus Bruce Brown, if you want to get real crazy with it. That level of attention that he gets, how much people are able to sink into the gaps, what you see at home or what a casual fan might see at home is Scotty Barnes missed a jump shot. What I see is there's nothing there for him to attack. If you want a really good example, and I wonder if OKC will adjust to this, but if you want to go back, if you have access to it, and I'm actually thinking about, maybe doing channel memberships where we can do private film sessions. I'm thinking about it. I clearly have not executed on Patreon or, private memberships or all that stuff, but I do a lot of film sessions, and I was thinking, for the people who are really, really deeply interested in this kind of stuff, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually do these film sessions offline with an audience of 10 so that as I'm learning, as I'm breaking down film, y'all can, learn and break down with me. It would probably make you a significantly better basketball mind and probably teach you a lot about the game that I'm not able to express in these lives. But I do want to say, what was I saying? OKC Thunder. Everyone is criticizing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for settling for jump shots. I want you to go back, fourth quarter, overtime, and go look at why he settled for jumpers. Go look at how Denver guarded and how they recovered and how Jokic and Murray and Porter and Gordon and specifically Christian Brown, guarded that entire offense. Look at how they pushed Shea away from his dominant zones. Look at how they closed down the paint. Look at how difficult his life became because of how Denver guarded him. Now, I'm sure that there will be adjustments and that there can be adjustments. And obviously, they're willing to live with Chet Holmgren shooting threes. Can you imagine the gap between a Chet Holmgren shooting threes and a Bruno Fernando or a Jakob Poeltl shooting threes or a Jonathan Mobo shooting threes? Like, everyone wants to credit superstars, but right now we're seeing superstars struggle immensely. We saw Tyler Hero, who's not a superstar but a star player, have like 4 points in an elimination game, and he struggled immensely. We saw Bam struggle immensely. We've seen, as I mentioned, Jalen Green, a shot maker who basically is in the NBA precisely because of that. We've seen him struggle. We're seeing Jimmy Butler struggle. We're seeing Jokic struggle, have the 2 worst games in a row of his playoff life. We're seeing Anthony Edwards struggle. We're seeing so many stars struggle right now. We're seeing Jason Tatum struggle. We're seeing Jaylen Brown struggle. We're seeing Jalen Brunson have his struggles. We're seeing Cat struggle. These are all stars. The Raptors, once they get to the playoffs, these players will face a level of pressure, scheme, and frankly, you will be dared to shoot. Jonathan Mobo cannot play in a playoff game right now. It just cannot happen. Grady Dick cannot play in a playoff game right now. It just cannot happen. This is the goal for the Raptors moving forward as this year continues. The development continues. You're going to have to get to a point where these guys can play in a playoff game. Not dominate a playoff game, not be stars in a playoff game, not be starters in a playoff game, but just be on the court for a playoff game. There's a reason why these rotations are shrinking. There's a reason why Tibbs plays 7 guys into the ground, because the 8th guy can't play in the game. This is the difficulty of roster building. This is going to be the difficulty of roster projection going forward for the Raptors. And I certainly hope that this live was informative in terms of understanding the perspective that is, it's not just always about the stars. It's not just about the stars. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander isn't just, okay, on the box score, he's missing those shots. But he's missing those shots because Denver is daring his teammates to shoot and to score, and they're not hitting shots. And so he's having to go up into against a boxing one. And really, in all honesty, there just aren't a lot of players who can deal with that level of defensive aggression and defensive scheme. There just aren't a lot. And that's why the ones who can are so special. And that's why they get paid $60 million. I'll talk to y'all later. Enjoy. And I will definitely see you guys tomorrow night for the draft lottery. Please hit like on your way out. I would very much appreciate it. It helps more people see this video. And at 3:30, if you are interested in seeing me have an aneurysm as OKC chokes away another game, to Denver, please join us on Playback, Player's Choice Playback. That's going to be really fun. We'll be on at 3:30. I will be there. I don't know who else is going to be there. Maybe you will be there. Talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.